You're listening to the VBMA podcast.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the VBMA podcast, entitled Conflict When and How. My name is Doug Ferry. I'm currently serving as the 2023 National Marketing Director, and I'm a fourth-year veterinary student at Texas A&M. Before diving into the content of today's episode, I'd like to first tell you about three of our loyal sponsors, Nationwide, AVMA Family, and Purina, who have made this episode possible. For almost 20 years, Nationwide has been honored to stand as a founding sponsor of the VBMA. Their goal is to help provide relevant educational content to empower aspiring veterinarians to take a holistic approach to pet healthcare and meet pet families where they are. The AVMA is your association. Whether you're looking for professional resources or no-cost insurance options for SAVMA members, the AVMA family of AVMA and AVMA Trust have your back. Purina Pro Plan Veterinary Diets and Supplements is a proud partner of veterinary professionals. Visit purinaforprofessionals.com to learn more. We are very appreciative of these sponsors here at the VBMA and express a sincere thank you for their continued support. I'd like to introduce you to our guest for today's podcast, Dr. Cyndie Courtney. Dr. Courtney, it's so good to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Courtney is both a practicing small animal veterinarian and founder of the Jerk Researcher, a workplace conflict consultancy. Her work combines real-life experiences with evidence-based approaches that offer practical solutions to workplace conflict. She is certified in Stakeholder Centered Coaching and has additional training in nonviolent communication, conflict mediation, workplace well-being, and workplace violence prevention. She has been recognized as a future leader by the AVMA, was WSAVA's 2019 Next Generation Award winner, and was Virginia Maryland's 2021 Outstanding Recent Alumnus. Now, might I add, she also is a longtime supporter of the VBMA. She graduated from Virginia, Maryland, where she was a member of her local chapter of VBMA while a veterinary student. She served in her local chapter as the speaker coordinator, and later served as the national marketing director as well. So we are very lucky to have her with us today, and we truly look forward to hearing her thoughts on conflict. Thank you again so much for being with us.
Thank you all so much. It's my honor to help support the VBMA and give a little bit back from all I received during my time in school. It is no understatement to say that the VBMA helped change my life. Some of those networking connections have literally led to the jobs I have today, led to me meeting my now husband. So my kids would not exist without the VBMA. So any way I am able to give back, I'm certainly happy to.
That is amazing. Hopefully, all of those things are benefits that come to our listeners as well.
You never know.
Right. Well, today, as mentioned earlier, we are going to be talking about conflict. So just to introduce the topic of conflict, we all experience conflict in some way, shape, or form, whether in the workplace, in our interpersonal relationships, in our communities, in our families, or even within ourselves. There are so many different times when we experience conflict. So I think the consideration can be, it's not if conflict occurs, it's when conflict occurs. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I got involved in this line of work because I got into practice and found myself being kind of a catalyst for a lot of conflict in my practice and thought something was wrong with me, thought I was flawed, thought I was a bad vet. And as I was lucky enough to have a team that helped me work on that, I realized a lot of other peers were going through the same thing. And so then I was able to reach out and use what I had learned to help others. So totally agree. It's something that no matter how great you are, no matter how much you learn, we're not going to 100% avoid it. It's not a personal feeling, and it's a skill that we can all develop.
Wow, and I love that you took your experiences with conflict and used them and continue to use them to help others. And hopefully that's what we can achieve today, of learning when to address conflict and how to successfully do so. So, to get things started, tell me to you, what even is conflict?
Yeah, and I get a little corny and I use some of the formal definitions, but I think they're helpful. And when you look at kind of the textbook for interpersonal conflict, this is by Hawker and Wilmot. They say it's an expressed struggle between interdependent parties over goals which they perceive as incompatible. And I really like that definition. I think there's some important pieces of it, namely that we have to be in relationship with people to even have conflict. If we aren't dependent on one another, then one party can just leave, right? Like if there's a conflict, they can just peace out and then we don't have conflict anymore. So that even the fact that we're disagreeing or we're in conflict means that we have a connection to one another, that we need one another, right? And then the fact that some of this has to do with perception, that sometimes it has to do with what each of us perceives as important and what solutions that we perceive are out there. And sometimes by deciding what we think is important or not, or by coming up with new solutions, we can address the conflict that we have. So I like that definition, especially because it can broaden the ways that we think about conflict and how we can approach it.
I had never thought about it in that way, and I'm sure I'm not alone with that feeling of
Yeah.
understanding, this is the result of a connection with another person. And this is a perception that we need to navigate to be able to find solutions and to be able to put our best foot forward. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, because I think in the moment, it can feel very much like the conflict is disconnecting you. And it can feel like whatever we believe about the conflict is the truth. And then working through it can feel a little bit challenging.
But worth it.
Yes, for sure.
I'd love to open up the floor to what you would like to address when it comes to these techniques that you have studied and applied and learned from in your experience in veterinary medicine.
I'd love for us to talk about when do we even engage in a conflict? When should we avoid it? And then when we do decide to engage, what are ways that we can do that more productively as opposed to escalating the conflict? And at least in my experience, speaking on this, working with people, I tend to find that teaching these things in the context of something that feels like real life, just like in school when you're doing case examples, sometimes that's the easiest way to learn. I think that applies here. And Doug, I think you put together a case example for us.
Yes, yes, I have it right here. Would you like me to read it?
Oh, please do.
Okay, cool. Here we go. Buckle up. So here is the scenario that we are going to base our discussion on today. Imagine this. You are an associate veterinarian and 1 year out of veterinary school working at a 5-doctor hospital at which all doctors are paid on ProSal, including you. All of the other doctors have been practicing for 5 to 25 years and are well experienced and highly productive. In the past year, you have worked hard, enjoyed your work, and learned a lot. In fact, over the past 3 months, you have become consistently profitable for the clinic and have been feeling especially confident in your ability to work up cases efficiently and effectively as a clinician. Your clinic takes walk-ins, and historically, the other associate doctors have covered those cases to enable you to focus on taking the time you need to be thorough in meeting the needs of your patients and clients. So you thought, at least. Over the past 3 months, your desire to take more advanced cases has increased, whether they be walk-ins or scheduled appointments. However, you quickly notice that no matter what you do to volunteer for a seemingly challenging case or offer to take on a walk-in patient, another doctor has already claimed the case. Being the astute doctor that you are, you suspect that the other associates are purposely hogging these cases so that they can earn the associated profits. You want to say something to the associates and the owner, but frankly, you're unsure of how to even move forward in this scenario.
Absolutely. And it is super common for me to especially face early career veterinarians. I mean, really, folks in practice at every stage that are dealing with a variety of different conflicts, but especially when you haven't been in that new leadership position, like where you're like, okay, yeah, maybe I've even been an assistant in a practice before. Maybe I've even been a technician, but I'm new to this whole doctor thing. And so, what am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do? How much weight can I carry? Am I making this up? Is this real? What do I do here? I want to touch on first the fact that we kind of have 5 options anytime that we approach a conflict. And as I kind of read these off, listeners might feel that one or the other of these feels particularly familiar. They might use that as a go to. So those approaches are accommodating, which would be where we just give in and give the other people what they want. In this case, letting the other doctors just continue to take on the cases and just accepting that, moving on with life. Avoiding would be continuing to feel bad about it, but never ever bringing it up. Compromising, which would be where we try to find a solution that maybe is going to be faster for us to come up with a middle ground, but it might not be exactly what they want and it might not be exactly what we want. Kind of everybody's halfway miserable. Collaborating, which is the infamous win-win, right? Where we try and get everybody happy. And then competing, which is where we try to leverage our power to get the thing that we want, even if it means that other parties are losing something out in the end. I know that I personally relate to competing. I know a lot of people who relate to avoiding or accommodating. And if you relate to any of those, you're probably well familiar with the downsides of each of them. And you can get in your head that there's one way that's right or wrong. So I always thought competing was wrong because I was harming relationships with people, or I've met people who tend to be avoidant and they see that as wrong because they don't end up getting their needs met. But collaborating isn't always the right solution either, because it can take a lot of time. And sometimes we're in an abusive situation where that other person is not actually going to collaborate with us. So I'd like us to walk us through, if it's okay with you, Doug, with first, when might accommodating or avoiding actually be a good solution? Kind of in this context, if that's okay with you. When should we even decide whether to have this conflict? Is that all right if I go through that?
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Go for it.
Fantastic. So in this particular case, so we're a first year veterinarian, right? And so while in the past couple of years, we've had a pretty solid employment market, right? Where veterinarians are highly sought after. It can be hard to get and keep veterinarians. That's not always the case. So if we're in a place where we're not sure if we're going to be able to get a new job, you have a lot of student debt, you need to feel financially safe or secure in your position, you might be a little bit less likely to want to take on that conflict. And so Christine Porath, she's a researcher at Georgetown. She talks about, when you consider a conflict, do you feel safe? And she talks more about, hey, do you feel physically safe? Do you feel emotionally safe engaging in a conflict with this person? I like to add, do you feel financially safe having this discussion with this person? Do you have that stability to feel like I can still get my basic needs met, even if this doesn't go the direction that I want it to go? So I think that's an important question. There's nothing in the specific example that you shared that says, hey, I'm really nervous or scared about these other doctors, but that's certainly the case in some practices where either people have straight up, they've used abusive language or demeaning language to somebody, and that makes people not want to approach them. The other thing that we want to think about is how useful is this conversation going to be, right? So if the individuals who are involved are actually already well aware of the concern, if they have straight up admitted that, yes, I want to meet certain numbers, I am always going to try and get the most complicated cases, I am always going to try and take the most complicated surgeries, it is unlikely that a sit down conversation with that person is going to completely change their mind. If it is a recognized desire and goal that that person has stated, our chances, especially with that person being established in the practice and having more experience of changing their mind, is going to be lower. Now, sometimes people decide it's still worth trying, and we'll get to that a little bit later. What do you do when people in power who might be untouchable are creating an untenable situation for you? We'll touch on that a little bit later on. But you do need to walk into that knowing that the prognosis can be lower. And in situations where people are even actively being bullied, it is not uncommon for them to report that kind of bullying and for them to be retaliated against and for them to actually be more likely to lose their jobs than for the bully to actually be reprimanded.
Wow.
So it's a situation we do want to approach with care. And if that's something that's going on, there's some other strategies we'll talk about that we can use to address that. So ask yourself, do you feel safe? And is it a situation where it's already out in the open, it's already well known, and you feel like if I bring it up, it's probably not going to change something? And the more, is it something that's been going on a long time? If this is something that's a relatively newer problem, you're more likely to change it than something that's a chronic problem. So just like in medicine, acute problems we're more likely to fix, chronic problems we're less likely to get a full resolution on, right? So at least ask yourself those questions about whether to engage at all. Now, I suspect that what a lot of folks are wondering is, okay, so I've decided, hey, no, I do feel safe. I haven't heard anybody talking about this being something that they're intentionally trying to do. I just suspect it's under the radar. And I don't know how long it's been there. I've only been there a year, so I don't know if it's been going on for a while or not. So it's something I would like to address if I can. So then most people would ask, okay, then how do I go about doing that? Hopefully without sticking my foot in my mouth, right?
Yeah, that's $1 million question right there.
Yeah. So in that case, that's usually where we're aiming for compromising or collaborating, where ideally we come up with some kind of solution that makes us happy and makes them happy. And the approach that I generally recommend is going to be a nonviolent communication type approach. And that's going to be a way for us to get a little better understanding of what's going on for them, but also give us a chance to express ourselves. And this approach is very much like mediation, except it's a type of mediation you're kind of leading yourself. And it does mean that we have to believe that the other person's interests are probably about as valid as ours. It does mean we have to trust them to tell us the truth. And it does mean that we have to feel at least somewhat of an equal power balance, that they'll also care about our needs. And so there's no conflict resolution method that works all the time. This one works a lot of the time. But if this is an abusive situation or you think that somebody is pathological liar, this is not going to be the one for you. So that might be a more complicated issue. You want to reach out for some outside help. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you understand the situation. So again, here in your prompt, you said, being the astute doctor that you are, you suspect the associates are purposefully hogging these cases. And I will say that the vast majority of the time that I talk with people who are engaged in a conflict, the situation is more complex than they expect. There's more going on behind the scenes. And a lot of times the things that they assume somebody is trying to do, that's just not the case, right? And so often our best thing that we can do is first get ourselves calmed down, because if we step into a situation with those assumptions and it's written all over our face, people are going to jump and feel defensive, right? If we walk in and we say, hey, are you hogging all those cases? Like, how are any of us going to respond? We're like, of course I'm not hogging cases. Of course I'm not just doing this for the money, right? That's going to be our response. So first reaching out and calming ourselves down by getting empathy from our friends and family and making sure we can really approach that conversation with an open mind, just like when we take a history with a client, right? We don't want to jump to assumptions and then miss the actual diagnosis. So we're going to want to go in, we're going to want to ask some non-judgmental, open-ended questions so that we can really figure out what's happening. And often that's going to be as simple as saying, hey, I noticed this. Can you tell me like what's going on here for you? Or can you tell me like how you see it from your side? So just asking a very open-ended question, listening again, just like when we take a history, trying not to interrupt. The goal of this initial conversation is not to share your side of things. It is not to come to a solution. Our intent in this first piece should just be to get a complete understanding of that person's beliefs, understanding, perception of the situation. Because the more clearly we understand what's going on for them, the more capable we're going to be of coming up with solutions or expressing what's going on for us. And the magic of this too is the more the other person feels heard or empathized with, the more likely they are to listen to us as well. So we try and get a complete picture of that. And so I suspect what might happen in this situation is that we might sit down with those folks and we might say, hey, can you tell me a little bit about what's going on in these situations? And you might end up hearing something like, oh yeah, like that was a client of mine that I've had before, or, yes, I'm just in the routine of snagging those, or yeah, like I had some vacation days off, so I was trying to play catch up with my pro cell because actually, we have negative accrual. And so like I'm trying to make sure that I don't get that. Or maybe it even will be like, hey, I had some concerns about when they brought you on. I'm not sure we actually had the caseload to support another doctor. So there might be a full range of things that you end up hearing, but you won't really know how to respond to those or what kind of solutions make sense until you hear that. And one of the things that I think is very helpful, both for understanding what's going on for them, as well as what's going on for us, is connecting what they're sharing to some kind of fundamental human needs. You tend to think about that triangle many of us probably saw in like an intro psych class at some point, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, saying, oh, at the bottom, you've got to meet your physiological needs, and then your safety needs, and then your social needs. So one, just know that needs are real, but the hierarchy is not. We know that people can meet kind of those higher order needs, even if they're not meeting their like basic physiological or safety needs. Sometimes they will have some degree of happiness, even if like they're not feeling super safe because they're leaning on their community. But sometimes we can get to, okay, why is this person acting in a way that makes no sense to me? It may be because they're trying to meet a need in a way that doesn't make sense to us. And looking at those needs can give us some more empathy, can also make it easier for us to figure out what solutions might meet that need for them and also meet needs for us. Once we really listen to what's going on for them and have a better idea of what's happening, then we can go ahead and express what's going on for us. And we may feel more or less vulnerable about how much we want to share. Where possible, it can be helpful to share our feelings. We might say, hey, when I see these cases going to the other doctors, and even when I'm trying to volunteer for them and to take them, um, I'm feeling worried or I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling confused. I'm needing a sense of confidence, a sense of cooperation. Would it be possible for us to come up with a system for me to get a certain percent of these walk-in cases every week? So that's a way that we might be able to express ourselves and then also make a request of kind of what we would like to address the underlying needs that we have. So we can honestly express ourselves. Now, in terms of going through these needs, that's not something a lot of us think about or have literacy in. There are some great needs lists people can find online. I also have some available. If folks are interested, they can contact me. I'm happy to share those to anybody who's interested. But yeah, that's a great way for us to understand here's maybe where I'm coming from. And if I got this need met, I'd feel a little bit better. And even if the other party can't meet that need, we feel a little bit less crazy for having it. It's like, am I a weird one for wanting to have this equal share or wanting to feel competent as a new doctor? Am I stretching here? So it at least can give us a little bit more of a sense of peace. And after we both express, then we can move into the problem solving part, which is often where we can brainstorm together and say, okay, this is what you wanted. This is what I wanted. Can we have an open brainstorm about what solutions might be? Ideally, without evaluating until we make that list. And hopefully, we find something we both can land on. And so that's that compromising and collaborating part.
Those are such awesome insights. And like what I'm hearing is that one, you're seeking to understand, you're seeking to view things from their perspective, to be
Yeah.
open-minded, you're wanting to paint the right picture here, right?
Yeah.
And to fill in the gaps and basically have your bias go and wash away and be able to get to the truth. And then I love the fact that you're trying to understand, hey, what does this person need? Like, why are they acting like this? Asking yourself the why. And I like the vulnerability of being able to say, this is like how I'm feeling, and this is what my need is, and being aware of why you're feeling, understanding why you are feeling the way you are, and then going into, like you said, brainstorming and requests. I think those are solid techniques to be able to, in a somewhat of a stepwise fashion, break down these situations that might be surrounded by a lot of emotions and confusion. I think that's the word that you used.
Yeah.
And to be able to have more peace about it and to have a clear mind, have your emotions wash away and think about this logically and collaboratively
Mhm.
is such an effective and helpful approach.
Because like we often walk in assuming, again, something like, hey, they just want more production. And if we assume that what they want is maybe the financial security or safety of money, and what they really want is it's convenient. They want the ease of doing it the way they've always done it, versus they want the emotional bonds of the relationships they've had with their clients before. The solutions that we might propose to those different things are going to look really different.
Mm. Yes, that's so cool. And I especially love that you connected this approach to how we are trained to think as doctors. We all know that in order to move forward most efficaciously in diagnosing an issue, treating that issue, understanding its prognosis, communicating these details to a client, you have to first understand what in the world is happening through getting this detailed, complete, comprehensive history. And so it's like I don't know, the keystone of like the arch here. You have to, or else everything is going to just like crumble. It's not going to be supported. You have to understand what is happening because it informs
Yeah.
everything moving forward.
And it also shows us how we know in medicine how easy it is to jump to conclusions too. And we know that can be dangerous. And so,
Yeah.
and I try and remind folks in our field that we have so many of these skills for conflict management already. Even if we got into this for the animals and not the people, like the animal behavior teaching skills that we gather, the animal behavior interpretation of their body language that we get, these history taking skills, these diagnostic skills and problem solving skills all fit so well into conflict management. And we really have a pretty strong foundation for addressing these things.
That is awesome. I love that. Now, the question I have is, say
Hmm.
you're in this scenario and
Hmm.
you felt safe, you have
Yeah.
felt like you can approach this person, you can compromise, you can collaborate, you feel confident, things
Yeah.
work out, things are great. But say we enter a similar scenario and we don't feel safe,
Yeah.
okay? We don't
Yeah.
feel like this person is somebody that we can actually communicate with effectively. We're up against like a brick wall here, an emotional brick wall. Like, what do you
Yeah.
do? How do you even
Yeah.
move forward?
Yeah. Sometimes we get into that situation, right? Where, especially with someone who has a lot of influence in the organization, right? So, whether that's with, hey, maybe we talk to the doctor who's been there the longest at the practice, right? And has a huge following. And so, if they're like, I'm going to take what cases I'm going to take and you can deal with it, and they're not going to listen to us, or it's the owner of the practice and they're like, this is just the way we've always done it and I don't want to change it. So please don't be confrontational. We might get into that position that we don't feel safe bringing that up. And so what then do we choose to do? And frustratingly, like we ideally want to be in a place that is willing to listen. And so at a certain point, we have to decide, how important is this need to us? Is the reason that we were concerned about this? It sounds like from the case that what we're looking for here is to prove ourselves. We want to show how competent we are. And maybe too, we're getting preyed on pro sell. So maybe we are looking to get some of that additional funds. So if they're not willing to move, if we have kind of this untouchable jerk, as it as we say in the practice, can we get those needs met in a different way? And if we can, great, maybe that's the direction that we go. If we can't, we have to decide how important those needs are to us and whether or not the downside of setting a boundary of saying, hey, if we don't change this, I'm going to leave. Or if we don't change this, I'm going to do some quiet quitting. I'm not going to put in as much effort here. We can decide this if then boundary. So if this
Mm.
happens, then here's what I'm going to do. Then we can decide how we want to move forward from there. Now, certainly there are some situations where it gets really emotionally difficult for people, and especially when leadership is allowing things that are straight up toxic. So, say this is a situation where people have said, nope, there's just not room for you here. These cases are mine, or we think you're incompetent, so we're not going to give you any cases. And they're straight up being abusive. I will tell you, if leadership is allowing that to happen, even if they're not the ones doing it, that's a big problem. And that kind of behavior is contagious. It tends to spread through an organization. It has harmful effects not only on your personal, mental, and physical health, but it also has negative impacts on patient care and on the ultimate financial success of that practice. And every expert I've ever read is like, when you can, leave that organization and find a place that's better. And we can get in our heads that, oh my gosh, is it going to be out of the frying pan into the fire? Is just every practice out there like that? And I will tell you, the data supports that it is not. It
Mm.
certainly can feel that way, in the same way that the dating pool can feel frustrating, that it's easier to find a partner who is unattached, maybe because they're not ready to be attached. And that can be frustrating. So it can take a longer search to find a good practice, but they are absolutely out there.
What recommendations would you
Yeah.
have for somebody in that situation who is having a hard time having that level of self-respect?
Yeah.
That can be difficult to be able to identify these issues that truly are inappropriate
Hmm.
and then to value your well-being
Hmm.
above dealing with those things in a toxic manner. What recommendations would you have for somebody who's struggling to make that leap into the fire, so quote unquote fire.
I think the the smallest step I can give people is one to like, they're already conflicted internally about it. So even if you're avoiding it or accommodating, looking at a needs list and saying, am I crazy for feeling this way or wanting that, can give you that little bit of validation. I'm also a big fan of everybody being in therapy and being able to just even talk to somebody and say, hey, is what I'm thinking, does this make sense or does it not? And having another brain to help you think through some things that can feel really flooding and very emotional. So your amygdala's on like way heightened. And so your rational brain's not thinking super clearly. It can be really helpful to have a second person there to help you sort through those big feelings and those complicated decisions. So I highly recommend that. And then to, I think, often say, where's the breaking point? So if somebody says it's not worth leaving because of that, you say, okay, I am staying because, and you say, so I'm staying because the money's really good, or I'm staying because it's going to hurt my reputation if I don't leave. And that creates a natural boundary for you to understand when it is time to leave. So if you're staying because the pay is really great, but now you're finding that you're having to spend a lot of money on your physical health and your mental health because it's so stressful to stay there, or you're not being able to bring in the money that you wanted to bring in because they're keeping cases from you, then that boundary no longer makes sense, right? It no longer makes sense to stay for the money because the place is so toxic that now it's depriving you of the money. Or if you want to stay because you don't want your reputation to be damaged, I can promise you that most places that you feel are toxic will ultimately get to a place where they think you are toxic too, and that will cause damage to your reputation. So we want to look at what is the reason we are choosing to stay despite the fact that this isn't great. And that can give us some idea of where the boundaries are. And 100%, no place is going to be perfect. And so toxic does not mean uncomfortable. It does not mean free of conflict. By no means. Being able to handle a reasonable amount of conflict, much as in this example, that's a very reasonable amount of conflict. That is not what I would call a toxic practice in our example. I think we can work through that, and we shouldn't just give up on any practice where we feel like things are a little bit hard. And there are certainly levels at which, if it does become harmful to us, we need to make some tough decisions.
That's very helpful to be able to have, again, the systematic, logical, clear standard for yourself that you can rely on to help guide you in moments of like obscurity and confusion, to be able to have, these are my indicators that I'm going to rely on, and establish those things for yourself. That's awesome.
Yeah. There's a great book for folks who do feel like they're very stuck and they know it's bad, or if they're rationalizing things for themselves. One common one I see is people are like, well, I'm going to stay because it's so difficult for the team. If I leave, who will protect them?
Mm-hmm.
And so a great book that kind of walks you through, do those rationalizations make sense? And if you are truly stuck, what kind of coping mechanisms can you use to try to maintain your mental and physical health the best you can in the meantime? It's a great book called The A-Hole Survival Guide by Dr. Robert Sutton out of Stanford. That's my go-to. And unfortunately, I end up sending it to a number of folks, but it can be quite helpful when needed.
That sounds awesome. I'll have to get that one ordered real quick. It sounds like a great resource. Thank you so much for sharing that. Man, we have been through so many just like nuggets of gold here when it comes to understanding conflict, like what even is conflict, and just entertaining the thought that everybody experiences it. It's not a bad thing. It's just inherent in life. And to be able to navigate conflict can look different for different people. As you mentioned, there are 5 different ways that we can approach conflict, and one way isn't better than another. They are all different and appropriate for different situations, whether that be like you mentioned, accommodating or avoiding, compromising or collaborating or competing, all of them having the role that they playing the role that they need in the right situation. Basically, what I gathered from this was when you are facing a situation in which you are feeling conflict, first it's like asking yourself, do I feel safe? Do I feel emotionally safe? Do I feel physically safe? Do I feel financially safe? And being able to determine if that box is checked.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is the case, to move forward in addressing the situation with the individual or individuals that you're trying to find peace with. And then like feeling that there is a good air quote prognosis there, to
Mhm.
be able to apply what you taught us about nonviolent communication, in which you collaborate, in which you compromise by being curious. You want to understand the other person. You want to overcome any assumptions. You want to see things from their side, but then to express maybe the need that you are experiencing and express like your request, and then to brainstorm together. And that's just such a cool moment when you are with somebody who you perceive to be like its enemy. They're on the other
Mhm.
team. They're
Yeah.
out to get you, but you realize you actually cherish the same things, and you actually are there as like colleagues to help one another, and simple solutions can be found, and you can apply them, and it actually is a moment when which like conflict helped you come closer together and to be
Yeah.
able to be more successful moving
Yeah.
forward. But that doesn't always happen, as you mentioned. There are those, the term untouchable jerks, to be able to recognize, am I safe here? And can I set boundaries based off of what is important to me? And then to be able that resource there, to the A-hole survival guide by Dr. Robert I Sutton, seems like a wonderful source. Are there any other thoughts that, after thinking through what we've talked about today, that you would love for our VBMA listeners to just always remember when they're addressing the various conflicting situations that they might find themselves in?
I think the one gap that folks might be asking about is, what if I am ready to go to the mattresses? What if this is bad? Yes, this person is an untouchable jerk, but I do feel safe enough to fight the good fight, right? What do I do? And so in that situation, I talk to people about one, documentation. So
Mm,
making sure that you save copies of any incidents that happen, say like, hey, this is what happened, this is when it happened, sending that email, keeping a record of when things are happening and what you sent to various folks in management or HR about what's going on. Collaborating with others. Generally, if you're not being treated great, there are usually other folks in your organization that aren't being treated great as well, or people who've been in that organization in the past. Increasing your leverage where you can. So, if there are skills or tools or parts of your network you can build that make you more valuable to the organization, you're more likely to then be able to change things. And to just also know like what your rights are and what resources are out there. There's a lot about employment law that I think a lot of us just don't even know, that it, like, for instance, that when you're in an at will state, that doesn't mean you can be fired for any reason. It just means you can be let go for any legal reason.
mm.
But there are plenty of times that people find that, oh my gosh, I just got pregnant and now I'm being treated like a troublesome employee. And this feels like discrimination, but I can't necessarily prove it. So I want to make sure people know what things are out there, know that if you're finding that you are being discriminated against, there are legal resources out there, that if the workplace environment is so hostile that it constitutes a safety hazard, that there are OSHA reporting opportunities, and that in many cases, because this kind of really bad behavior can contribute to harm to patients, that there are opportunities to report to the board. And again, while some of those things can be a hard road to go down, they don't always have the outcome that you like. Sometimes it can start laying a foundation, if this person is going to continue in this behavior, for things to change later on. Or even just give you some peace of mind that you feel like, hey, I did something about this, especially in very severe, what I call three fire alarm cases. So I want people to know that those options are out there.
No, that's very astute and very helpful. And I'd imagine that our listeners here would love to connect with you personally about additional thoughts that you might have about addressing conflict. So I want to ask, where can our listeners go to connect with more of your content moving forward?
Yeah, so I'm probably the most active right now on Instagram at the Jerk Researcher. I repost a lot of content that has to do with employment law and conflict and things like that. They can find me hopefully at a lot of conferences out there. So I'm often speaking at national conferences like AVMA. I'll be at Wild West coming up here just this weekend. So, and I love when people just reach out to me. I do have a website, so thejerkresearcher.com. They can contact me there. But I often am happy to do very short, free consults or exploratory calls with people who are going through a hard time. And sometimes it's just as simple as empathizing with what they're going through, normalizing with what they're going through, and saying, hey, it's not just you, you're not a failure. or being able to connect them to some other resources that are out there. So I really feel like addressing conflict is one of the ways that we start breaking this cycle and start reducing burnout in our profession. So I do what I can to help and connect people to bigger resources if they need it. And sometimes that's me, sometimes that's somebody else.
Well, on behalf of the VBMA as a whole, I want to express our gratitude for all of the work that you're doing to be able to help our community address the conflicting situations that they are experiencing, and for the many lives that you're blessing, and specifically for being here with us tonight. You have enlightened our minds immensely and given us insight into how to be successful in our careers, because conflict it's going to happen. It happens all the time. And these are such valuable skills to be able to do so successfully. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being here with us and for your longtime support of the VBMA.
Thank you so much for having me, both to the national board as well as to all of the VBMA membership out there who hopefully will listen and benefit from this.
Thank you. And for those listening, if you would like to stay connected with the VBMA and be aware of upcoming episodes of our podcast, go ahead and follow the VBMA on Instagram. Moving forward, we are going to have various episodes released on our podcast about overcoming adversity, paying back student debt, or specifically the honors portfolio. So go ahead and make your way to our Instagram account and give it a follow. And in the meantime, we wish you all the very best. Good luck with all that you have going on, and take care.